So I recently read a story about a small town that was dealing with an explosion in their squirrel population. And for some reason, the squirrels seemed to be especially attracted to the local churches. So the Presbyterian Church called a meeting and to decide what to do about their squirrels. And after much prayer and consideration, they concluded that the squirrels were predestined to be there and they shouldn't interfere with God's divine will. At the Baptist church, the squirrels had taken an interest in the baptistry. And so the deacons met and they decided that they should put a water slide in, and as the squirrels got curious about it, they would slide down and drown. The squirrels really liked the slide, and unfortunately for the Baptists, they instinctively knew how to swim, so twice as many squirrels showed up to enjoy the fun the following day as word got out. The Methodist Church decided that they were not in any position to harm any of God's creatures, so they humanely trapped their squirrels and set them free near the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, the squirrels were back, and the Baptists took down the water slide. The Catholic Church came up with a really creative strategy. They decided they would baptize all of the squirrels and consecrate them as members, and now they only see them on Christmas and Easter. The Unity Church, they embraced their squirrels with open arms, inviting them to participate in any of the activities that spoke to them, that would support them on their spiritual journey. They also encouraged them to join them in their fellowship time after service, announcing that in addition to their vegan and gluten-free and lactose-free snacks, they would now be including a nice selection of nuts. Not so much was heard from the Jewish synagogue. After they took the first squirrel and circumcised him, they haven't seen another squirrel since. I haven't pulled my squirrel joke out in a long time, so it was time. Spirit said, this is the day we're going to do this. Because, well, it's very tongue-in-cheek. And please, we love all of the paths to God. It does remind us of the differences that we each bring, differences in our values, differences in our perspectives that exist, certainly within our spiritual communities and in our country, and the challenges that can arise as a result. This semester, in my Integral Ministry Practices program this year-long program that I'm taking, one of the books that we've been studying is called Being the Beloved Community, Spiritual Leadership to Master Change, and it's by one of our sister CSL ministers, the Dr. Reverend Jim Lockhart. We've been studying this too as a small leadership group, just beginning to understand how it is that the challenges that are being faced in spiritual communities can be better understood and can be more easily addressed so that we continue to thrive and to grow. It seeks to take the popularized vision by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in the 50s and 60s when he talked about this beloved community, his vision of what was possible when we could all come together. It was one that was first coined by a philosopher in the early 1900s, Josiah Royce. And to figure out how we integrate that into our own communities, how we can, it's a global vision, but how we can at least start in the midst of our own families and our own communities. So in Dr. King's vision, it was this vision of humanity all around the world, cooperating together, sharing in the earth's abundance so that all people thrive. A recognition of the intrinsic worth of all people. A time where prejudice and cruelty and greed were replaced with an all-inclusive spirit of friendship and goodwill. Where love and kindness and compassion, peace and service replaced any hate or violence or poverty that people might be experiencing. This vision of the beloved community really has been around much longer than Our awareness of it, for those of us who've been around a couple of decades or so, and certainly those before them. It's the same vision that the Apostle Paul and James, Jesus' brother, and others had when they were first embarking upon what we now know today as Christianity. As they started to go out and preach the good news, they have this vision that through that good news, all people would come together. And we could bring that energy of love and peace and bring that commandment of love one another into being. Organically, Christian communities began popping up all across the region when newly converted Christians would gather in people's homes, and they would create oftentimes this communal living where everyone contributed their gifts. Each person played a role and supported the community in the ways that they could so that they could collectively bring this good news to the world. And as often happens when you bring a large group of people together, conflict often replaced this ideal of love. It's evident in the many letters of Paul to the different churches that were being formed, and James in his epistle, that creating the beloved community was far more difficult than they had imagined. There were disagreements about doctrine. There were different value systems, especially as Jews and Gentiles started to coexist together. There was unfair power given to those wealthy benefactors. They seemed to have a lot more sway in what and how this community was going to come together. And of course, in that time, they also had to contend with the persecution of the Romans around them. So it's not a surprise that eventually this idea of this communal living sort of morphed and changed into this church structure. In the 60s and 70s, when Dr. King was active in awakening the world to this vision and to this freedom and equality for all, it caused a cultural reawakening in many of the young people in the 60s and 70s. I know there might be a few of you that might have been one of those people that had a cultural awakening. Make love, not war became sort of the mantra of the young people in that time. And there was this wave of communal living that rose up, at least in the US. It's estimated that more than 3,000 communes were created over about less than a decade, from the late 60s to the early 70s. And hundreds of thousands of people, sort of what they call dropped out of society and tuned in to this new way of trying to be with each other. Each embraced this path of nonviolence and had this desire to really be in a place where everyone cared for one another, where this idea of loving one another was the value that the community held. They shared labor and food and shelter and parenting and their financial resources, and yet this experiment was sort of short-lived in its time frame, whether it was because of drugs or people breaking the rules and having no way to hold them accountable, or money issues led to many of them finding their way back into the mainstream of the US population. The church model has been in place since the 1500s and has had moments of success in developing a deeper capacity for this kind of agape love, this kind of compassionate care for one another. And yet, this model is rapidly fading away for many of the same reasons that those early Christian communities did. Disagreements about doctrine, different value systems trying to come together and coexist, and not always knowing how to make that happen. Unfair power, we've seen often given to the wealthy benefactors in any given community. And what we're learning today is we have a big group of people that aren't always at their healthiest when it comes to emotional and spiritual intelligence, is what they call it these days. But there's a dysfunction. People get triggered by other people, and we don't have the tools and the capacity in which to move through that in a way that really honors both people. The author would tell us that being the beloved community is only possible when we understand cultural evolution and the dynamics of personal and social change. That's our starting point. Dr. Lockhart also adds that the community must be spiritually and psychologically as healthy as possible and continually work towards getting healthier. And it focuses on helping its members realize their own loving and compassionate natures. That becomes the focus, is how can we realize, because when we realize those at greater and greater capacities, it diminishes the amount of challenge and conflict that goes on within the community. And how do we then spread that out into the world? And here's the other part. This is where compassion becomes really important. We have to recognize our own humanness and realize that we have this tendency to fail. We have this tendency to fall short at times as we're learning, as we're growing, and as we're seeking to be in that space where we truly can say that we love one another, all the others. So he uses in this book, and I've introduced this a few times, this model called spiral dynamics. It's a framework to understand our own human cultural evolution. You can see here that it starts, and when you look at the beige, we're talking like 250,000 years ago, and over time, as the world got more and more complex, there would be greater and greater capacities built in this human evolution. The challenge in our country and in our churches right now, today, is where it used to take hundreds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years for different cultural value systems to arise in this very fast-moving, changing world right now. If you felt like things have sped up, they have. We have 3 different predominant cultural values all at play, especially we're going to talk about just the U.S., not the whole world, but just the U.S. And the default is at times these clash with each other because each one thinks it's the best. They have the best values based on where we're at. So in the U.S., it's estimated that right now that 5% are at the beige and purple level, and 5% are at the red level. So I'm not really going to focus too much on those because that tends to be what's now moving out of our value system here. But when we look at blue, and the stage blue, and I know you may not be able to read that, and I always think it's going to be bigger than it is, but I'll tell you a little bit. So when we get to this blue, they call it value meme, and these are not blue people, these are blue value systems. There's no people that are colored by this model anyway. We all have different value systems. So 15% right now, it's estimated, of the population in the U.S. is centered in this blue value system. In this blue value system, many would call it the traditional system. You see the world as black and white, as right and wrong, as good and evil. There's not much gray going on when you're in the blue value meme. Those in that aspect of how they see and understand the world really value tradition, and they tend to be willing to obey authority, whatever that authority is. The challenge in this value system is that it can become quite rigid and inflexible. If there's only good and evil and right and wrong, there's not much capacity to embrace other perspectives and other value systems. So what arose from in this orange value mean, which started coming into our cultural awareness with the scientific revolution. So it was probably starting late 1700s, but really came into being in the late 1800s. That's when it really saw its rise in people evolving and adopting or embracing the values of what has been called the orange value mean. This is the modernist era. And 35% of the population in the US is right now centered with those as their core value systems. It focuses on the individual. It's the individual's goals, its success, it's rational. It's all about knowledge and resources to improve the comfort and the longevity of life. It values pragmatism over principle. There are times when maybe that's the law, but because of some high-level value, perhaps it's okay to skirt around that. The challenges that have arisen out of this orange value system is that the people that are centered in that often are very frustrated with the people in blue value systems, and you'll see also very frustrated in the people who are centered in the green value systems, which is what arises next. And both sides can be challenging in being able to embrace and understand value systems at these different levels. So green, if we look at and this is labeled postmodern, is about 35% of the population too. Does that make sense? We're pretty split right now. We got 35% sort of in that orange value place and 35% in this green value place. So green is all about equality. It's all around connection and consensus. It's values this sense of peace and love and harmony over finances and growth and success. What most people would say the biggest challenge is in the green realm is it's harder to get anything done. It's harder to make decisions. We all just want to talk about it and process it, which will make people in the orange value system nuts. You know, it's like, we can have a discussion, but let's just make a decision and move on. You might see yourself in some of those different areas. And then when we look to what is being called our next call, our next evolutionary, and they call it a giant leap because it asks us to really embrace all the different levels, find value in all of them, heal whatever things might have come up as a result of them. And it is yellow, even though that doesn't really show a whole lot of yellow there. And there is about 5% in the US that have this yellow, and what follows on next, the group. Imagine that all people could really embrace these values of others as valid, embrace the best in each of us, seek to live with this responsibility of valuing, of being, over having and doing. So it's like orange in its highest form, if you will, when it comes to what I would see as spiritual values. It really is all about the valuing to our greatest extent of ourselves and all people that are a part of this world. Now, this is kind of a very simplistic view of this. You know, there's so much more that goes into this. So it's just a broad swipe rather than a fact. And the truth is that each of us probably have different value systems for different aspects of our life. For example, we might have very blue traditional values when it comes to our families. We might have more orange-centered values when it comes to the work that we do and working out in the business world, and we might be very green when it comes to the values we have about a spiritual community, or some combination of all of those. So there's no one space likely that each of us 100% occupy. We are some myriad of all these, but we just want to be aware of it so that we can begin to at least recognize when clashes happen. It may not be because they're just a rotten person. They may just have a different value system than we do. So I came up with this analogy when it comes to especially spiritual community and how we respond to something. And again, it's a little tongue in cheek, so just go with me on this. So imagine that we have this leper colony moving in to our neighborhood. The way typical value systems respond, those traditionalists in blue they would organize some food drives. They would maybe have a drive to collect clean bandages and deliver them to their center, and then to pray for God to heal them. Those who were centered in the orange value system, they would start doing some research. They would do research, is there a cure, or at least come up with some pain meds to make their life a little more comfortable, and they would pray for them to activate their own healing powers, because it's all about the power within when you're at that level. Those with green values would probably invite the leper colony to church. They would listen with empathy about their challenges and how life has unfolded for them, and then they would pray to support each of them to awaken to that interconnectedness and that wholeness of life. So when we look at this, again, we want to understand that one level is not better. This is not, this is, when you get to green, now you've achieved more or you have a higher value system than orange or blue. The difference is, as these different levels evolve, they evolve to deal with greater and greater complexity. Green value systems that embrace so many different people and so many different cultures and walks of life are there because that's the complexity of the world that we live in right now. So it's not that they're better values, they just allow us as human beings to manage things that are more and more complex. And the call for that yellow and teal is because it's not getting any simpler. It's just getting more and more challenging. We see it now. Now with our technology, now all of a sudden we've got AI. Well, what do we do about that? We have medical technology that will let us reproduce life. Well, what do we do about that? All of the advances that we've made have also brought up some real and complex challenges in our life. What we can do is be the healthiest version of wherever we find ourselves in this spectrum. And that's what this journey these days into being a beloved community is all about, is how can we be the healthiest version of ourselves? And we can only do it when we can let go of our allergies to the other levels. That's what they're often called. You may have had a very traditionalist upbringing, and now you have just, that is no longer a part of who you are, and you have rejected all of that. Well, part of it is still with us in our journey, and there are some valid parts we want to embrace about that help us in the way in which we live our lives. And the same at orange, and the same at green. We want to take the very best of all of those and be able to embrace them, and embrace people who are in a different value center than we are. So as we move into our meditation, I'm just going to invite you to just go within and see what's resonating within you right now in those different ways in which your value systems have evolved, and to see if there are some areas that are calling for us to embrace them as equally valid in not only our own journey, but in the journey of our fellow humanity. So if you'll take just a moment and just set anything aside you might be holding on to. Begin to bring your attention inward. Sometimes it's helpful to close your eyes or just focus on some point in the room so that you're more focused on your interior than what's happening in the exterior world around you. And a quick and easy way to do that is to just connect with your breath. Notice your breathing as it's drawn into the body, that air, and then let go with the exhale of the breath. And then notice that thinking part of you may be quite active in this moment. And as you breathe, just imagining all of those thoughts slowing down. Or perhaps you can park them somewhere off to the side to be re-engaged later. But right now, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere else that you need to be except in this very moment. And imagine now that when you draw that breath in, that it's not only going into your lungs, it is being breathed into the center of your heart. With each breath, your attention is focused in that area, and you can see and feel that with the very attention that you're placing on it, the energy there, the light that is the very center of our being begins to activate and grow. It only needs our focused attention to expand in our awareness, in mind, to expand into every part of our body, to expand our awareness of who we are as divine beings. Many have said that in order to see as God sees, we must see through the eyes of our heart, see through the eyes of love. So I invite you to see yourself as this kaleidoscope of human values and to embrace the very best that each brings to you. And if there's some part that has caused hurt or upset in the past, just invite that in to this circle of light and see it as an equal gift that allowed you to grow, that allowed you to move into a greater way of being, both spiritually and in your human journey. And then take just a moment to bring to mind and to this eyes of the heart someone that challenges you with their value system, challenges you with their actions that arise as a result of it. And see if you can't also recognize the good that those values can bring into our world, the very highest and best of them. Letting go of the parts when our humanness hijacked them and used them for things that they weren't otherwise meant to be used for as part of this ever-evolving journey. See if you can see them as God sees them, as a beloved and whole child of the Most High. And as you begin to bring your attention back to this time and to this space, bring back with you that awareness that there is value in all of the experiences and all of the perspectives, in all of the different ways that people embrace life. And as we are able to embrace them in our own lives and embrace them in our community, we can become that example of the beloved community to our world. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. So the author suggests in his book that our call is not necessarily to try and leap to the whatever that next value level is for us, or to try and get up there to the yellow and the teal aspects of life, but as I said earlier, to seek to become the healthiest version that we are in this moment. To create this beloved community in our spiritual centers asks us, and asks the leadership especially, to be authentic, compassionate, emotionally and spiritually intelligent, which really means that we've done our own level of shadow work. We understand when we get triggered that it's really something that is seeking healing from within our own subconscious rather than about the person who was on that triggering end. And it requires us to be flexible. It asks us to include in our values curiosity and openness, transparency, and practices that support the entire community to embody these capacities. Father Richard Rohr writes that the human ego prefers anything, just about anything, to falling or changing or dying. The ego is that part of you that loves the status quo, even when it's not working. It attaches to the past and to the present, and it often fears the future. What I've discovered in the work that I've been doing over these last couple decades is that the ego is a really bad driver. When you see those people out there being really bad drivers, just know that the ego's in charge. And in order to create this beloved community, it asks each of us to discover ways to put our divine nature into the driver's seat with the ego just riding along. It has its work to do. It wants to make sure we stay safe, but it is a much better support for this journey, and we have a much easier time when our divine nature is leading the way. And our spiritual principles remind us that we can. And they remind us that in this very room, there's enough. We have it already. It's here for us. There's enough power. There's enough love. There is enough of all that we need in order to be that Christ, that love of God in expression. So this is our journey together. It's one that will not happen overnight, but it's one that I hope you'll join me on as we explore how we can be that example to the world of the beloved community. We are grateful for all of the ways in which you share your gifts with us, those gifts that you give from your heart, whether it's talents that you have, whether it's a willingness to serve different aspects of our community, and certainly the financial gifts. Today we're going to be passing the baskets, so you can just either bless them if they come by you, and this isn't your Sunday to share, you can add one of the little cards that you find in there if you give electronically, or just put your energy into the basket, knowing that good flows in and through this community, and all that we need in order to be able to create this space for the potential of a greater expression of the beloved community is done through these channels that are present today and many others that come in and through us. So let us take what we offer today into our hands and into our hearts and bless it together. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, Father, Mother God. We're going to all stand together and sing the peace song. as we go into this day, into this week, seeking ways that we can embrace all of the value systems in our lives, in our community, in our world, as we seek to move closer to being that beloved community. And we do it all as we remember our prayer for protection together. And we're going to do it call and response. Let's try that again. All right, here we go. I'm going to say the first part, you say the second. The light of God surrounds us.
I am the light of God.
The love of God enfolds us.
I am the love of God.
The power of God protects us.
I am the power of God.
The presence of God watches over us.
I am the presence of God.
Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.